You're listening to the Pigskin Cafe, a podcast covering the wild world of college football. On tap for today are hot takes, controversy, and analysis on your favorite team. Here's your host, Hampton Sipper, in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back into the Pigskin Cafe. My name is Hampton Sipper, and joining me tonight, I got Graham Haney and Chase Haney, and we're going to break down Week 5 of college football, and we're going to have as good of a time as the Ole Miss student who was making out with the goalposts on Saturday night in Oxford, Mississippi. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here tonight. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you have not already. Leave us a like, leave us a comment, follow us on social media, and we appreciate all the engagement we have had thus far this year. Now, tonight on the show, we're going to break down the thriller in Oxford, Ole Miss versus LSU. We're going to go to Durham, North Carolina, break down Duke versus Notre Dame, another wild finish. Auburn, Georgia, Deep South's oldest rivalry that was closer than the experts think. And then we're going to briefly touch on Arkansas versus A&M and Alabama versus Mississippi State. So, Chase, why don't you guide us through this great conversation we're about to have tonight, man?
Yeah, man. Hey, well, thank you for the preview and the warm welcome. So, thanks, Hampton. And, hey, you forgot to mention that we've got actually that guy who is making out with the goalpost. We've got Joey Freshwater coming in hour 2. So, stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Yes,
stay
sir.
Tuned. Hey, well, grateful that you tuned in. Hey, let's jump right on in. Hey, there was a big matchup, and for multiple reasons, I don't even want to spoil it, but just this Ole Miss LSU game, when it kicked off, that game had a lot of almost like legacy for Kiffin and for LSU. And Graham, I'm not picking on you. I mean, at the beginning of this season, you know, there were people picking LSU to win the conference. So, like, there was heavy expectations, a lot going into this game. And it was actually played in Ole Miss, which I do think contributes. So, Hampton, let's start with you. That game kicks off. Just what's going through your mind, and then as it comes to an end, just take us kind of through where you started and where you ended.
Well, I told everyone on the pod last week, and I told everybody at my work and anybody who would listen, this was my most anticipated game of the weekend because it's always a good rivalry game. And I think what you put as far as it being a legacy game for either program was perfect. Lane Kiffin, as good of a coach as he is, has not had that one signature victory at Ole Miss. LSU, on the other hand, you win the SEC West last year, okay? But like I've said on this podcast, them beating Alabama covered up a season that was not as impressive as it looked because the Alabama win glossed over the 3 blowout losses you had, the one to Tennessee, the one to Georgia, and then obviously you lose close to Florida State, and then to begin this year, you get blown out by Florida State. So this was a big game. No margin for error left for LSU. And as the game kicks off, Ole Miss gets off to a roaring start. Goes right down the field, first drive of the game. Jackson Dart is humming. Quinshon Judkins is humming. But then LSU comes right back down the field and they score. And it was back and forth, a track meet the whole entire game. Defense was absolutely optional in this one in Oxford. And what I take away from this game, obviously the ending was thrilling. Ole Miss gets the ball back down 49-47, goes down the field, scores with about a minute and a half left, if I remember correctly. No, actually, it was less than that. It was 37 seconds left in the game. Go for 2. They're up 55-49. And it's wild turkey, a.k.a. Pete Golding time, man. Is that defense going to hold? And they about gave it up. I mean, the first play that LSU had the ball, they get like a 30, 40-yard gainer on, in Ole Miss territory. And credit to Ole Miss, they hung on. They hung on at the end, giving Lane Kiffin his first signature win in Oxford, which I think cannot be undervalued. I mean, this was a massive win for him and for that program. And kind of if you take a macro view of this, I think it kind of is interesting just to see where LSU is at. Offensively, they are good as anybody in the country. I mean, Jaden Daniels had arguably a career game. He had over 500 total yards. He had 4 touchdowns, I believe. I mean, their offense was explosive. But on the other hand, their defense was all-time bad, just like they were all-time bad versus Florida State. And, in our preview show, I told everybody that was my concern with them, was that defense, but mainly that secondary. And Jackson Dart, after getting absolutely tossed around in Tuscaloosa the week prior, he comes back, he throws for 389. Quinshawn Judkins, who had not been great all year, 33 carries, 177 yards and a couple tutties. Trey Harris comes back from injury, makes a huge impact on the game. 8 receptions, 151 yards. I mean, they exposed that LSU defense even more than Florida State did. They put up 706 yards of total offense, which was an SEC record. I think they missed 18 tackles. They gave up, they were 9 of 16 on third down, given up, 2 for 3 on fourth down, allowed 12 explosive plays. I mean, it was a clinic in what not to do defensively. And going forward, I mean, I don't know how you fix this year, because I kind of think part of it's personnel, but part of it has to be scheme and coaching, because there's no excuse, no matter the talent of personnel, giving up 700 yards to Ole Miss, especially after last week where Alabama, I know they're 2 completely different caliber defenses, held them to 10 points. So I think LSU, as good as their offense is, they're in trouble. They are in big trouble, and it doesn't get any easier because this week they go to Como, go to Missouri, and play the 5-0 Missouri Tigers. And I just want to shout out real quick, Graham, our sleeper teams, brother, are killing it. You picked Mizzou on the East, I picked Kentucky, both 5-0. And then I picked Ole Miss on the West. They're 4-1. Well, the only loss coming to Alabama, and then they take down LSU and the Paper Tigers, which is what they look like on defense. So overall, credit to Ole Miss, credit to Lane Kiffin for getting up off the mat after really a devastating loss in Tuscaloosa, because they came into that game thinking they were going to win. But to rebound like that in the fashion that they did, very, very impressive. And I think going forward, they show you they can put points on anybody. I know they struggled against Alabama, but I think Alabama's defense is up there with tops in the country. So credit to Ole Miss, credit to Lane Kiffin. Brian Kelly, you're 13-6, brother. You're 13-6 in your first 19 games at LSU. The seat ain't warm, the seat ain't hot, but they've got a lot to figure out down there, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Graham, I'll kind of ask you the same question, but Hampton brought up where I wanted to go. So maybe approach it from this angle of, Chip Kelly, listen to me. God, help me with the name. You just said it. Brian Kelly. My gosh. I feel like I'm getting old. That name, it was here and then it was gone. He steps in, Brian Kelly steps in, and has immediate success. And I think you kind of saw that Gus Malzahn got at Auburn. And it's almost like hey, you really don't want to do that, because if you do that, that's going to be the standard. You'd rather have incremental success over each year. So, Graham, help me just kind of understand maybe how you came into this game, and then maybe reflect on, hey, Brian Kelly, kind of where do you go from here? Not that you would say that last year was a fluke, but how do you kind of mesh last year with what's going on now? How do you get the troops back going? Or, is there a small fire that's starting? Just kind of tell me, kind of walk me across, and then really touch on where Brian Kelly is.
Yeah, so I just want to point out the fact that last week's preview pod, I said that the team that won this one was the first one to like 60 or whatever, and it was an offensive shootout. I mean, it was really incredible and just really fun to watch. Probably like not that great of football when you like think of X's and O's, but just fun to watch.
Game of the year.
Yeah, it really was exciting, especially for Ole Miss, which hasn't had a big win and I guess since the last time they beat Alabama, which has been 5 years, something like that.
2015.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, 8 years.
I know.
Okay. Anyway, so I think for Ole Miss, this is a huge win. For LSU, this is a big loss in the sense of the expectations are so high. Chase, like you mentioned, immediate success coming out of Baton Rouge and Brian Kelly coming down to LSU and saying that they're going to be viable for national championships. And last year we saw the potential of that. They played several great games, but we also saw that floor was extremely, extremely low whenever they played Georgia and Tennessee and got absolutely dismantled. Then when you look at this season, the same thing happens week 1, and I think that they were all shocked. They were all just in disbelief that they could get demolished by a team like Florida State, which Florida State's talented, but they haven't really taken anybody else to the woodshed this season. And we were really high on Florida State after week 1. And so I just want to put that out there. So LSU looked really bad week 1. Florida State looked really good week 1. And you look at those situations, just how they've flip flopped. Whereas LSU responded well in weeks 2 and week 3, and so it was okay. Maybe that was just a really bad performance by LSU. They've kind of put the pieces back together, and they're going to be viable this week against Ole Miss and Hampton. Like you mentioned, the defense was optional. The defense was horrific. Jaden Daniels, a phenomenal quarterback. Their offense can play with any team in the country. I think as of right now, their offense is one of the best in the country. That defense is a major liability, and it could lead to more losses for LSU this year.
Yep.
I think the big concern for me at this point for LSU is in the post-game press conference, what did Brian Kelly have to say about his team? He said they were really young. If you look at this roster, they are not young and inexperienced. They might be inexperienced, but they are not young. They're juniors and seniors all across the board.
And they brought in transfers.
Yeah, exactly.
They're naturally older guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Outright lines of Baton Rouge and the Louisiana public. Wow.
I mean, but this is the second bad take he's had in week 1 against going into Florida State. He said they were going to beat the stew out of them, just in just other terms. And then this week he's saying we're young and inexperienced. What kind of standard are you expecting? Or are you trying to say that we're good enough, we're the best in the country? Or now you're trying to say oh yeah, we're really not as good as people think, but we're young. That's the excuse. For LSU, you really have to define your identity in the sense of what is this season? What is a good result for this season? You're going to make a bowl game, but is 9 wins what you're looking for? Is 10 wins what you're looking for? Second best in the West? I think for LSU, you have to really come to the realization of what is progress look like this year. In the sense of last year, you had wins that you shouldn't have had. I mean, that you probably did not expect is probably a better term. This season, what is progress for that? Because you can't beat the number 1 ranked Alabama team if they've already lost to Texas. You come into this season, what is progress going to look like for LSU? I think that as of right now, I think they're confused. I don't know. I don't think they can define what they're looking for this year. So to me, that's the biggest concern. Offense, exciting to watch that defense.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I like it. I mean, this is one of those matchups, though, that you'll look back on and really say, hey, that was a defining moment in the season, lived up to the hype, and maybe one of the longest football games to ever exist in human history. I mean, quick rant. You knew that ESPN knew that game was not going to be over, but to even think about airing Alabama on ESPN News, that was the play the whole time. Was to put it on ESPN and then immediately start it on ESPN News, ESPN Plus. I was kind of frustrated because it was the same thing with one of the Fox games. Oh yeah, it was the dang race that was on that was going into the sixth final lap. Trying to watch the Baylor game, which is worth shouting out that before we move on, I just got to insert that I was outside doing some yard work. I couldn't even get it on my phone because couldn't start because the race was still on. I couldn't even get it on my phone on the app before it was already 7-0 UCF. I'm like, here we go. It's 21-0 before I feel like I even got dirt on my fingers. And anyways, really cool. Started listening to this next game that we'll talk about. And anyways, cut it on. We were going to eat dinner with friends and saw UCF having to kick a field goal from, their logo. And Baylor comes back to win, came back for 28 points. That is a program, fellas, that we've talked about on this pod that I've brought up that really struggling with some identity. Not saying they might make a bowl game, but just asking some big questions. And that could have not been more of a wild card of like what's behind door number 8. So anyways, fellas, let's keep it moving right along. Worth mentioning because it was a cool historic moment, and we've been trying to give the Bears some love. So let's move on to it was a big game that I want to kind of hear if this ended. I'm going to go to Duke versus Notre Dame first. Let me know. Kind of give me a little bit of like, did the right person win, if that makes sense? Like, as you're watching this, maybe who were you rooting to win, and then did they win?
Okay.
Okay, Hayes,
I'll let you want to take this?
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah,
okay, go ahead, Graham.
Okay, so for this one, I thought that we all picked that Notre Dame would win, and I obviously the result was what the result was. But to me, we expected better quarterback play. I think that was the definition of the game was going into it. We thought it was going to be Sam Hartman versus Riley Leonard, 2 top-tier quarterbacks in college football. I mean, man, were they average. I think that you look at it, I mean, I think that Riley Leonard was bad. Sam Hartman was the definition of average. He was 15 for 30 for 222 yards, had a QBR of 64.8, so 65. So, I guess what is the average 50? So I guess a little bit better than average, but not really exceptional in any way. But like going into the season, and we talked about it after the first few weeks, we expected Sam Hartman to compete for the Heisman Trophy, that he was going to be a top-tier quarterback and was going to carry Notre Dame to the college football playoff. And in 2 straight games, we've yet to see him really put on and be the show that we expected him to be. And then on the reverse side, you look at Riley Leonard for Duke. I mean, just bad. 12 for 27 for 135 yards, 46 QBR, so not good. I think for Duke, this was a big game. Even if you lose, I think it's a big game for Duke in the sense of the show was on and we kept the game close. I think for Duke that was a good performance in the sense of we didn't get blown out on national TV for our one game of the year that we're going to be on ESPN. So anyway, I think for Duke, performance was fairly good, but we kind of knew that Duke's ceiling was kind of capped. So I think the story of this week, quarterback play was not what we expected at all.
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of piggyback off that. My biggest takeaway from the game, Duke should have won this game. And for the life of me, we talked about it last week in another game that Notre Dame played. But instead of Notre Dame doing it this time, they were the recipients or the benefactors of it. It's 4th and 16. You have been blitzing and being aggressive the whole drive and making life you-know-what for Sam Hartman. But then on the 4th down, you rush 3 and play soft zone coverage and allow him to run for a first down. What is it going to take for coaches to stop playing that soft drop coverage and only rushing 3 in critical situations of the game when you've been heating him up and having success? Because Sam Hartman is a 6-year guy, right? He looked very unsettled and very uncomfortable that final drive with all the pressure that they were sending his way. So what do we do on the most important play of the game? The complete opposite. And it allowed him to get the first down because everyone's back was to him. That's inexcusable. And I love Mike Elko. He has done a fantastic job at Duke. Fantastic job. And he put him in position to win that game. But you did a disservice to your players when you rush 3 and drop 8. And to me, that is the main storyline of the game. Graham, I agree with you. Quarterback play was not good. And one thing that we really didn't account for when Duke beat Clemson, Riley Leonard from the air was not very good in that game either. He hurt them on the ground. And, his passing efficiency is not very high. And it wasn't in that game, and it wasn't in this one. Sam Hartman made a big play at the end, and then Estime finished it off. Notre Dame holds. Huge win for that program, because if Marcus Freeman would have lost that game, again, no hot seat, no seat even warm. But it would have been a little tense in South Bend if he drops that in back-to-back weeks. To me, it's a credit to him and to that program to get up off the mat the way they lost to Ohio State and to come out, go on the road, prime time, it's Duke's most important game of the year, and get that win, even if it was ugly. So credit to them, but going forward, this is the last point I'll say, and then we can kind of move on. Sam Hartman's got to be better. And, Graham, you mentioned it. The past 2 games, he's not been good. Or he hadn't been awful, but he has not been the quarterback that he is expected to be and that you brought him in for.
Yep.
For those big games, for those big moments, hitting and stretching the ball or stretching the field vertically with a deep ball. I don't know if they don't trust their receivers. I don't know what the deal is, but they're not pushing the ball. They're being very conservative on offense. It's very much run, pass, punt. That kind of seemed to be the cycle during that game. They cannot win that way. They cannot win that way, and it doesn't get easy. I mean, they've got a tough remaining schedule. They go to Louisville this week. Louisville is 5-0. Louisville is playing good football, so it doesn't get easier for Notre Dame. You've got to trust Sam Hartman to be the player that he is, and he's got to step up if Notre Dame wants to really contend for a title like we all think they can.
Yeah, Marcus Freeman is one of those coaches that just might be better. Kind of like Saban, like they almost need a loss. Like they need something to bargain their players with. And just massive win for them. Way to respond is what I'm trying to get at. That it means even more that they responded to really a heartbreaking loss. And just didn't seem nervous. They were excited. Like they got up for the game. Man, that run to just end it was just like, dang, that's how this game's going to end.
I know.
But, that's how college football is. You got to defend every single play. So, and you don't know which
and
play.
Hope Riley Leonard's okay. That was a terrible way to end with him having that. I believe it's a high ankle sprain. Hopefully he can come back later in the year.
Yeah, for sure. And hey, that's an Alabama boy, if I remember correctly. And
Fair hope, baby. Yes, sir.
You might need to hear from this podcast that he sucks. You watched the game day special. Apparently his mother's the first one to tell him every game day that he sucks, because if he can hear it from her, he can hear it from anybody. So
that's what I'm saying.
I'm just trying to
shout out for making our jobs easier.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I think we've got a few more that we want to hit on. So
go quick.
Let's go. Let's go Auburn UGA. This is a CBS game, which you're like, why does CBS pick up this game? And what a ball game, fellas.
Yeah.
So, Hampton, let me ask you this question. What kind of
buddy.
magical, enchanted material is Jordan Hare Stadium made out of?
I've tried to figure this out my whole life, because it is the bane of my existence, the Indian burial ground that Jordan Hare Stadium is built on. It's incredible. It never fails. But thankfully, the little pixie dust ran out on Saturday versus Georgia. I don't have a whole lot to say as far as analysis on this one. Then I'll kick it to Graham, and we can kind of move on. But really impressive showing by Auburn to get up off the mat, kind of like Notre Dame did after a tough loss for A&M, where you kind of got flat out embarrassed on the road, and to give Georgia all they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, part of that was because Georgia kept shooting themselves in the foot with turnovers, penalties, you name it, to hurt themselves. They did it for the majority of that game. But Auburn came in and wanted to be committed to the running game, ran for over 200 yards on Georgia. That doesn't happen very often. And they did that with virtually no threat of a passing game, because Peyton Thorne, Robbie Ashford, the walk-on, nobody from Auburn can get over 100 yards against a Power 5 team. They've not done it in 6 straight games, which is quite embarrassing. I'm not just saying that as an Alabama fan. I would say the same if I were an Alabama fan and that was my team. Just flat out embarrassing. But they kept it close. Defense played well. But in the end, the best player in college football took over. His name is Brock Bowers. And Brock Bowers, I don't gobbly-goo over many opposing players on other teams. Brock Bowers is the best tight end I've ever seen in college football.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the top 5 to 10 players I've ever seen in college football. The dude is an animal. He's
Yeah.
a specimen. He's special. Appreciate what you're watching, everybody, because those last 2 drives, I mean, Carson Beck didn't even throw a couple good passes on a couple of them. No problem. One hand, contested.
Unreal.
Could not stop him. And I guess Auburn's defensive coordinator thought it was a good idea not to double him in the most important junctures of the game, because on the go-ahead touchdown, he was wide butt open.
Mm-hmm.
And when he gets the head of steam, good luck stopping him. So my main takeaway, credit to Auburn, Hugh Freeze, for the fight that they showed, especially that defense in that running game. But you have a big blunder on defense toward the latter half of the game with not covering Brock Bowers. And then overall in Georgia, the point I want to say about them, they're still very talented. They're still a very good team. But this Georgia team is not the same Georgia team of the past 2 years, especially defensively. They've still got athletes. They've still got talent. But you can't name a Jalen Carter, a Trayvon Walker, a Nakobe Dean, a Jordan Davis, guys that were difference makers for them. They don't have that this year. A Nolan Smith. And doesn't mean they're bad. Doesn't mean they're not a good defense. But it's different. And I think as the season goes on, especially with their offense being a little limited, I'm afraid I think a team's going to get them eventually.
Mm-hmm.
May be wrong, but I think the vulnerability is there through the first 5 weeks of the year. So those are my kind of main takeaways for Auburn, Georgia. What say you, Graham?
Yeah, to me, I think this game was, I mean, truly, like, it didn't come down to one play, but one play made such a big difference, in my opinion. And it was the 60-yard run by Peyton Thorne. It was like the way that Auburn drew that play up, it was like Georgia had not prepared for that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And he breaks it down. I mean, what was it? It was second or third down. So to me, it's needing get a first down with it.
Yeah.
He breaks the 60-yard run. Auburn keeps coming back to it, and it's not unsuccessful, but not as successful as that one time. It was like all of last year and the year before that. There were you watched Georgia, and it was truly the definition of, like, they were always coached well, and they always seemed prepared for whatever any team had to throw at them. Like the TCU national championship game, TCU had nothing to throw at Georgia that Georgia hadn't seen already.
No.
You look at this game, Auburn had one play that they knew Georgia had not prepared for, and they ran it for 60 yards. I think that's, Hampton, you talked about it. The shutdown ability of this Georgia defense is not what it has been in the past. I mean, but credit to Georgia. They go into a tough environment, eke out a win.
Find a way.
You also got to do a little bit of self-reflection, knowing that you almost lost to a team. You beat a team by 7 points that didn't throw for 100 yards and ran for 220 yards on you.
Yeah.
For Georgia's defense, you got to look in the mirror and make sure that you are who you say you are, and that your identity is what you're putting out there on the field. And I think for Auburn, this game was the definition of their season. You knew you weren't going to win the SEC championship game. You knew you were going to win the SEC West. Hey, if we can just knock off Georgia or Alabama, we'll call it a success. All right, so you tried your best at Georgia. Now we're saving up all the bullets for Alabama at the end of the year. But credit to Georgia, credit to Hugh Freeze. They at least made some plays on a Georgia defense that we did not expect. Last point I'll say, and then I'll throw it back to you, Chase. This was the first time Georgia had been tested all year, truly. South Carolina put them to a test at halftime, but South Carolina their offense is really bad, and they go on the road and face a tough crowd, and they pull it out. So for Georgia, I think you do also have to just say, hey, we made it through this. Let's just keep going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. You're right. Like you said, Hampton, feels like there's a chink in the armor, and we're going to see if somebody's going to be able to expose it. So, man, it would be Auburn. It would be Auburn to give the number one team in the nation that run for their money. So, guys, I actually listened to a lot of this game towards the end. I don't know how much we want to talk about the Arkansas A&M game. There's something probably worth mentioning, but I'll just say that last week I said, hey, this game might get ugly in A&M's favor, and ugly is a strong word, but I will say that Arkansas, just listening to this game, did not seem to ever really be in this game. They had guys get hurt, but I mean, it sounded like KJ Jefferson was visibly upset and frustrated, and I don't really know what you do if you're Arkansas. This is kind of, they've got their glass ceiling, and maybe they've raised their floor a little bit, but these are the kind of games that they usually get up and play for.
Mm-hmm.
And this one kind of got out of hand. I might say a little bit of where their program's at. So maybe I'm overreacting.
Mm-hmm.
Hampton, just give me your quick thoughts, and you can throw it to Graham on what y'all thought about this game.
Two quick points, because we'll cover more when we preview arguably one of the games of the weekend in Week 6, Alabama A&M. My main takeaway from the game, like you said, Chase, A&M controlled it for the majority of it, especially that defensive front. 7 sacks, 15 tackles for loss. If you had told me that before the game, you're going to pick A&M to win. I mean, that is as Josh Pate likes to say, a padlock stat. That is what that is. They control the line of scrimmage. Max Johnson was efficient and didn't put the ball in harm's way much. I know we threw one pick, but they controlled the majority of the game. For Arkansas, you lose your best weapon first drive of the game in Luke Haas, who I talked about on the pod last week. When I heard that he got hurt, I was like, they had no shot, because he torched LSU and he's a big weapon for that team. And I really feel bad for them, man. Think about that. Think about this. They had BYU at home, then they had LSU, then you play A&M, then you play Ole Miss this weekend, and then you play Alabama the next. That's a freaking gauntlet, man. And I think they're just wore out. Like, I mean, when you go through that gauntlet and go to war and go to battle every week after week against good opponents, you're going to wear down, especially with the lack of depth they have. So I feel like Arkansas is kind of teetering a little bit, maybe limping in to this game against Ole Miss. Be interested to see how they respond.
Yeah, Graham, do you think that I'm sorry, I was just going to kind of ask you that question. Do you feel like they lean in against Ole Miss, or are they just burned out how this game turned out?
I don't think we'll talk about that maybe in the preview show. I don't think Arkansas wins against Ole Miss based off their own performance. I think Ole Miss would really have to just lay an egg in order for Arkansas to win. But to me, it was just it really just kind of questioned, what is Dan Enos doing? Like, what kind of plays are we calling if Rocket Sanders is up? Yeah.
What's their
Where is Dan?
Yeah. You look at who's Arkansas's best offensive player, Rocket Sanders. He got 11 touches on the ground for 35 yards. His longest run was
11 touches.
He got 11 attempts for 34 yards. He caught two passes. He caught 2 passes out of the backfield for 36 yards, and one of those was a big reception. So his longest catch was 38 yards. I mean, it was like, yeah, A&M did a great job of getting to the backfield, but if you're Arkansas, why are you not giving the ball to your best player at least 20 times during the game? Mm-hmm. And I mean, maybe that was because they did start off in a deep hole and had to just start throwing the ball really quick. But to me, that was just questionable, play calling in the sense of our identity is going to be, we're going to be physical, we're going to run the ball. Mm-hmm. What are we going to do? We're going to drop back and get sacked almost every play.
Yeah.
Just unbelievably bad about Arkansas. I think that the score of this game is a whole lot closer than what the actual performance was. I mean, this was probably a 20-point game. When you watch the film on it, it's just that's what it is. And I guess Arkansas is kind of lucky that they only lost by 12. So for Arkansas, I mean, the gauntlet continues, like you said, Hampton, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any easier going forward.
No.
Yeah. Well, feather in the cap for you, boy. But like I said, we'll get into this. Hey, A&M's got a really good defense, so plenty to preview. Kind of coming in. That makes the A&M Alabama game really excited to preview. So let's talk about the Bama game real quick. That's the last one that we're going to touch. So just Bama Mississippi State. There's not much to talk about. Hampton, I'll let you start. You look ready. Just kind of give me your overall thoughts.
Overall, good road win. I think the team showed improvement. Defense balled out like it usually does. Gave up a little too much on the ground for my liking, but I think a lot of that had to do with Mississippi State breaking tendency a little bit, running it on third long, second long, and caught us in dime a good bit. Kind of a lighter defensive front. Offensively, rough start. I mean, this is nothing new. It's kind of a theme at this point. But as the game went on, I think Jalen Milroe played better. He was more consistent from the pocket, going through progressions a little more consistently. As I've always said, it's not that he can't do it. It's doing it play in and play out, not every once in a while. That is what the measuring stick of a good quarterback is, doing what you're required play in and play out at a high level. Really impressed with Amari Black, had a good game.
Yeah.
I think the offensive line played arguably their best game of the year, rushed for 193 yards. I know a lot of that had to do with scrambling by Milroe, but I thought they controlled the line of scrimmage pretty well. Thought they were good in pass protection. And big test against A&M, which we'll talk about. And that I'll kind of save a lot of my stuff for there, but I just want to shout out Kevin DeMarcus Steele for bringing the steel curtain back to Alabama, baby. I'm a big Kevin Steele guy, and what he's done with that defense, 3 turnovers. We finally got a non-offensive touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
Feels like the first time in eternity, Chris Braswell. So I'm juiced about the defense. I'm juiced about the game this upcoming Saturday, which we'll talk about in our next show. So, Graham, what did you think of the game really quick, and then we can kind of get on up out of here.
Yeah, I think Hampton, like you talked about at the beginning, and I mean, just Alabama's whole season has been defined by quarterback play. Jalen Milroe, there's still a little bit left to be desired, but he was more efficient. He got out of the pocket efficiently, not looking always to run, made a few throws, and was 10 for 12 for 164. No passes, no touchdowns through the air, but
and no picks.
No picks. But like I said, he was more efficient, which is what I like to see for Alabama's offense going forward. Jalen Milroe doesn't have to throw for 250 for Alabama to win. He just has to throw enough for the defense to respect that and keep those safeties back so that we can run the ball better. And for Milroe, his just ability to make explosive plays in the run game, I think, is really big and will be very helpful for Alabama going forward. So, good win for Alabama. This Mississippi State team is definitely down. Since they have been
not good. Yeah.
Will Rogers, Hampton, the guy that we love so much, was so awful. But Alabama continues to streak. When was the last time Mississippi State beat Alabama? 2007 or something like that?
6 or 7, yeah.
So long ago that you don't even remember. The streak continues. We'll see you again next year.
That's right.
Actually, we won't. We don't play them next year.
Yeah.
RIP to the tradition of playing Mississippi State every year.
Yeah. I mean, Mississippi State's got to figure out, I don't know, is Zach Arnett their guy? Is he just kind of the interim? He seems like a great DC, probably not the best head coach. But Mississippi State will probably never be, that team. So anyways, well, fellas, we've talked about a few games. We needed to recap. So, hey, if you're listening to this, thanks for tuning in all the way through. But, we've got now 2 podcasts that are coming out, not just the one that you're listening to, but there'll be one that comes out on Thursday, which is going to preview the coming week. And fellas, are we going into week 5?
6.
Dude, that kind of breaks
my heart. We'll be at the halfway point.
That kind of breaks my heart because it's such a sweet season and it's flying by. So, hey, we'll come here whenever you're listening for college football material and content. We're your people. And again, grateful that you listen, but the Pigskin Cafe is going to be closed for now. But until next time, until Thursday, chew on that. We'll see you soon.